Okay, I mean, does anyone have any contributions on that or questions? Do you believe that this is just too big a challenge, that it needs the kind of degree of central planning that kind of arguably is kind of politically inconceivable at the moment? Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Bob Wakefield, Submarine Technology. There's another big activity going to start very shortly in the North Sea, and that is the disposal of the 406 platforms between now and the mid-century, 2050. That's going to create enormous changes to the costs of what we're proposing to do, and I think it's going to have a profound effect on the rates that we pay for boats.
Which way?
Well, they're going to shoot up. It's going to be a very competitive market out there.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of pessimism coming from the floor, compared to the panel. I mean, are other people kind of, sceptical? Do you have reasons why you think, it might be dubious? I'll take something further back, and then we'll come to you. But
yeah, Nick Orbell from Hutchison Ports. We're actually one of the biggest container port operators in the UK, and we are positively trying to look at this whole agenda, but I think the scepticism is creeping in, not least because of things like regulatory issues and just simply the sheer number of hurdles that we have to jump at the moment to get anything brought forward, having spent 6 or 8 years getting various planning consents for container terminals, being one classic example. And in an economic climate where our core business, handling containers, is suffering along with every other business in the UK and globally. And the question really is where the incentive is coming from and the certainty to cope with the risks attached.
So if anybody was well placed to make the investments, the enabling investments that you talked about, it's a big port operator, isn't it? I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound really sceptical, but,
clearly that's been where the challenges have been up to now, but, the industry has only just started, effectively. So the notion that people need to understand how to participate in this is clear. Now, I mean,
but he's talking about practical
issues.
Yeah, practical hurdles.
But if you take the average port, and that one's not necessarily the average, but the average port is typically have their own planning abilities, if you like. Now, there may be, if you're doing a very big scheme, you need to get broader planning consents, but harbour trusts generally have the powers to make their own decisions as to what to do with the ports. I think it's all about money.
Again, the question is shaking his head. Sorry.
Rob, I'd like to agree with you, but unfortunately we have things like environmental law to deal with now and a ramp of other legislation that, quite frankly, makes us completely uncompetitive compared to the continent. I mean, the number of discussions we have with our shareholders in Hong Kong trying to explain English legislation... Is it because you're competing
against subsidy? Or is it the enabling of a state that's willing to make...
It's the whole mentality. We're up against... The comment was made just now. We're up against a European situation where, particularly for examples like Dunkirk, Flushing's another one, where the state is enabling things to happen quickly.
So it comes back to the point about state planning.
There is a rhetoric in the UK that would like that to happen, but unfortunately the rules that have been set down don't allow it. I mean, 2 points coming through at the moment, IPC and the MMO. They haven't been mentioned. The MMO comes into effect later on this year. Is that going to make it easier to lay offshore grids, or is it going to make it harder? Is it another hurdle to jump? It's an absolute classic case of, is the environment moving in our favour or against it?
Okay. Does anybody want to pick up on any of that?
There are 2 good points. I mean, the MMO, the Marine Management Organisation, is intended to be the one-stop shop which deals with the very issues you're talking about there. They do they're already started working, I guess, but they won't really take effect until the next 6 months or so. But it's a good point, and frankly, there is still some coordination required with government, and there's a new government coming. So exactly what happens there, I think
it's early to say that, actually, Rob. I think it's
Well, there will be a new government.
By the way, yes, there will be a new government.
I didn't say what colour it was. So. Yeah. And there will be a need to try and get these things consolidated. Okay. And the IPC has the potential to be...
again, probably everybody in the room knows.
Infrastructure Planning Commission.
Okay.
Oh, so that's the one-stop shop if you want to build a third runway, apparently.
Yeah.
So, it has every opportunity of being successful. But again, depending on the colour of the government that comes out, it will shape how it actually functions. But I think people understand what's needed to be done. Now it's a case of making it happen. And I think these voices in this audience here hit in the right places will make a difference.
I've got a question at the back there. And then
Can someone on the panel please comment on what
who
we
are
should...
you? Sorry,
Graham Bocking, Nordics. Could someone on the panel comment, please, on what we should be saying to the parties about nuclear policy? Because we have there a situation that there may be a commitment to offshore wind. However, there is also a massive complication out there. We're having proposals put forward for nuclear development, which is also going to be competing for construction resources, for financing resources. How do we best react to this, please?
Who wants to pick up the nuclear baton? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't try and promote offshore wind by damning nuclear. I think we've got to make the case for offshore wind on its merits, and I think there's a very strong case to be made for very different reasons. I do pick up on the point made earlier about, a few decades ago it might have been easier because essentially much of our industry was nationalised, certainly more centralised in terms of its management. I think things have changed very fundamentally. We now have much more of a market in much more of the supply chain that we're now looking at, and we have a much higher level of public scrutiny of what actually happens. I think that is another major shift from what we've seen as investment sort of 30 or 40 years ago. So the question is, would we have been better, or would we be better off if there was some big organisation that just manages the whole thing from cradle to grave? I think the reality is that the investment needs to be made by companies, be they utilities, be they oil and gas companies, who essentially want to invest in the generating asset. That is their core business. They don't terribly want to invest in all the infrastructure that comes with it. They want to invest in the generating asset. There is a case for saying, look, let's look at things like the grid, the planning, the ports, and actually regard that as something which we can manage maybe more centrally, derive some real benefit from managing centrally. Don't ask developers to try and second guess the risks around planning, grid development and location and so on. Let them do what they're good at, and only what they're good at, and provide more of a platform for them to invest against. So it's kind of a halfway house. It's not going right back to, let's just centralise the whole thing and nationalise the whole thing. The reality is we're not going to do that. But actually, let's acknowledge that the move from where we were in the 1960s gives us some very real challenges today.
I just want to ask if you feel that addresses your question.
No.
No. Well, why not?
I think that there are policy arguments which need to be addressed there. We've got, it seems, a nuclear policy which has been dumped on us without proper scrutiny. And I think... there is...
Although they do say no subsidy for nuclear, don't they?
Which perhaps we need to address.
Robin has to come in here.
I'm going to try and come at this from a rather less than predictable angle. I think first thing I would say is I agree with Tom. You've got to make the case for offshore wind and for renewables on their own merits. And I think one of the reasons that after a white paper in 2003 that said nuclear would not go ahead because it would compete and undermine energy efficiency in renewables and that it wasn't an economically viable prospect, within a few years it was back on the table precisely because there had been both deliberate and I think partially because of circumstances, the appearance of doubt in the Westminster mind, the idea that renewables wouldn't deliver. That was only a few years after that white paper, and I think there's a real danger of self-fulfilling prophecy. The more any player, wherever they are in the supply chain, wherever they are in the political spectrum, says that this can't be done, or it's not credible, or it's all so difficult because we've got all these things and hurdles to jump through, the less likely it is to happen, because it's that lack of confidence that's put other technologies like nuclear back in the mix.
He's criticising you lot, you know
I am. I'm criticising everybody, including the Green Movement as well. We need to build a much more sort of sustained and credible and repeated case. At the very top of the chain, it's vital, actually,
but at the same time, you have to interrogate, the economics of the industry to ask whether it's actually viable.
But let's do that from the context of understanding that the technology does work. I mean, that's a debate we've had to have. I've certainly had it on the radio myself.
Yeah, but quite rightly.
That it's a growing industry, that worldwide people are making big profits off this, and we're missing out in Britain, that there are jobs attached, that this is strategically and in terms of UK competitiveness vital. And let's move on from, should we do this or can it be done, into how do we make this happen? And I think unless we all take that kind of approach, we're going to continue to have threads of doubt, which will become self-fulfilling. The other thing I would just say is a very factual point, though. Nuclear industry claims it doesn't want subsidy. It's changed its tune. EDF does want a subsidy now, and there's
it relies on a carbon price.
It's not only a carbon price. They want a fixed unit price for waste disposal, which is basically a public subsidy to get rid of the waste. So there is subsidies right across the piece. This isn't just about renewables.
Okay, sorry, this gentleman here has been waiting very patiently.
Yes, Martin Blakelock. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Martin Blakelock. I'm a banker, or what I prefer now to call myself, a project financier. But I'm glad we're talking a bit more about money, because it's money where the control lies. And there will be a lot of subcontractors in this game. It's bound to happen. But where the money is, where the control is, that's where the decision for the managing contractor is going to be. And that will control the R&D and the technologies involved. If you look at our power sector here, or power market in the UK, the bulk of it, 80% of it now, is controlled by 4 or 5 major utilities. You've got EDF, RWE, E.ON, Iberdrola, all excellent companies. But they have their headquarters where they take investment decisions, not in London. And there is not one single British national on the boards of those companies. Therefore, why would they wish to invest in the UK before investing in their home markets? Got to make it very attractive indeed. If you add other players, possibly in the game, Vattenfall, Suez, the same applies. Actually, Suez has got one UK director on the board. So we're a bit up the river without a paddle. Yeah? We're not in control of our destiny on this.
Okay, can we ask the question of the panel? Because that's a very clear question there. You know, Anne, you're a foreigner coming in, trying to plunder British wind resources.
That's kind of what Rob said. This one is yours. We are a foreigner, and we are a global company, and we are investing in Britain.
Have you got any Brits on the board?
No, we have no Brits on the board. We have an American and a German and a Dane on the board alongside Norwegians. But the thing is that we are a company in search for growth and new business, and you go where you can make money and profits and use your competence. And Britain is providing that opportunity. And Britain is also providing a stable government regulation for it. It's a safe place to invest our money. We are all over the world in quite difficult countries with the oil and gas business. This is a growth opportunity for us to coming up in a very friendly neighborhood. So in that sense, I think that would go for very many other foreign companies as well. And there will be a lot of spin backs to the UK, and you're not out of control because you are controlling the regulations.
So as a project investor, do you find that, that was your phrase, wasn't it?
No, not really. Yes, we control the regulations and the licenses for being a power company or whatever, whether it's wind or whatever. But we don't control the decisions. You do, in your company, wherever that may be. And it's the same for others. And unfortunately, we're in the situation where the main players in the business are not within these shores. There are a number of independent power companies who are often financed by private equity type groups. Their perspective is perhaps not the same, dare I say it, as your company, which takes a long-term view. Usually private equity and those kinds of investors have a 3 to 5 year time horizon, which is very short in the power sector. So it's a very uncomfortable situation that we are in. And actually, just to make the comment on nuclear, the situation with nuclear is even worse than that because of the amounts of capital that are needed in order to build a nuclear power station, even if you're allowed to. Right?
Yeah, I see the point, but I think we all know that SSE and Centrica are quite British and are deeply into this industry as well. And from our perspective, the energy industry has grown international. And whether you have a Norwegian base or a British base or an American base, you're all over the place. And these investments are so large that it is a business for large international companies. And that's where we are at. And I'm not entirely sure that the British company would put their money in a lower return project, even though it was situated in Britain. So this is about seeking growth opportunities in a profitable industry and well regulated, and I think Britain provides that.
I think just one final
quite
comment,
quickly, yeah.
One final comment is that, yeah, I take that all on board, and to a certain extent, the oil industry and the gas industry is very global. But if you look at the utility market, particularly within Europe, then it's interesting to see how little progress has been made with regard to the liberalisation of power markets, except here in the UK, and perhaps there lies the problem.
And I think there lies the opportunity as well, actually, because when you look at what's happened on, for example, on round 3, the utilities, the European utilities that you mentioned are all pretty much there, and a few more, and they have come here because they want to be in the market, just as Statoil have. So the fact that they can be in the market because there isn't the same sort of regulatory environment in their home markets, and they can compete in this market, is quite an attraction to them. When you look at what they're actually doing here and the call they have made, and this is a generalization, to make the decisions to come here, they are quite significant. They have made active and very clear decisions not to invest in their home market and come to the UK. In fact, when I went to visit Statoil just not so long ago, I was reading the local press was, why is Statoil investing their money in the UK? Why aren't they investing in Norway? That was one of the questions. And that is replicated. So I think, it's not answering the question directly, who has control. On a pan-European basis, does it really matter? Isn't it just where the investment goes that's important?
And how many people it employs?
No, can I leave it there? Because I'd like to move on. There's a guy over there who's got a question. And our final panellist has turned up, Ed, who's going to make his way down. But can you ask your question? Or
Right. Stephen Stewart Matthews with ODE. We're project managing the Ormond field for Vattenfall. And I'd just like to echo that the Scandinavian investment in the UK has been very positive on the Ormond project, which is a pilot for round 3. I think there are now 600 jobs have been created in the UK and are working. Bifab has already been mentioned as one of the key players and are employing about 400. What's needed to move it up, and that's about 30% of the project. What's needed to move it up is investment in products. We were unable to source products in the UK, and that needs long-term certainty. 8%, it's a good rate if you're looking for a pension return.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we need to take a lesson from Brunel, who was looking at 100-year and 200-year horizons with low interest rates. Then you've got a very good return. We have low interest rates at the moment. Maybe we need to look at the long horizons.
How long that'll last is another question. Ed Crooks, who you probably all know is the energy editor for the FT. I won't give you the whole background of what we've been discussing, but we've been talking about the liberalised UK energy market and the extent to which that is a kind of helpful or a hindrance to companies investing from abroad. Now, my understanding was that the reason we've got this energy crunch happening is because there hasn't been long-term investment in the British market, which must be something to do with the way that the energy market's structured. So is that going to be a deterrent to people investing in offshore wind?
My own personal feeling, sorry, I must apologise for my lateness first. I feel like the bass player in Spinal Tap. Do you remember that bit where they're all trapped in the pods and he just manages to burst out of his pod just as the song ends? Sorry, the other thing is, obviously you may think cynically as a journalist, I thought I was just going to turn up when the drink was being served. Anyway, no, I think this argument can be overdone. When you talk about having this energy crunch coming, actually, one of the very interesting things about this winter is we haven't had an energy crunch in the slightest. That we had periods of extreme strain on the system, record gas demand, and yet the system worked extremely well. And actually, we had, under the entirely deregulated private sector system, we've had enormous investment, in particular into gas supply in this country, with the big new liquefied natural gas terminals at Milford Haven, new pipelines coming in from Norway in particular, but also increased capacity on the pipelines from the Netherlands and Belgium as well. So I certainly don't think it's the case that the system we have at the moment is very obviously broken. I think it is the case we are making unprecedented demands on our energy system over the next couple of decades, and in terms of unprecedented demands in terms of emissions reduction while trying to guarantee security of supply. So I think there's a legitimate question to be asked about whether the arrangements we got will be fit for purpose, but I certainly don't think it's the case to say, oh look, obviously what we've got is broken and
no, but will it be able? My question was actually, will it be able to deliver offshore wind in a liberalised market where you can build, gas? You're free to build gas, which is much cheaper at the moment. I mean, so will we get the investment through that we've been talking about needed for this huge investment in offshore wind?
It depends what you mean by liberalised market, of course. I mean, the issue is, in an entirely unsubsidised market, no, absolutely not. There's no way it would happen. The market, left to its own devices, would always build gas. You're absolutely right. The question is, how much of an intervention do we need? And obviously we have quite a lot of intervention already as it is with the renewables obligation, the emissions trading scheme and so on. The question is whether we need to just push those existing arrangements a bit further, or whether we need to chuck out everything we've got already and start with a blank sheet of paper. And my sense of it is we don't know, and we will only discover the truth over the next few years. But
arguably,
just to get to the end of my point, my instinct is that actually it's more like pushing the system we've got a bit further rather than starting again from a blank sheet of paper, which I think would have all kinds of risks and costs involved in it.
Now, I'm not going to come to a panellist on this because I kind of know what you're all going to say. And I want to come back to you. I think it's Ian, isn't it? Because he expressed a lot of scepticism about whether or not a non-kind of planned market could deliver the kind of investment needed. I mean, are you convinced, Ed thinks that, chances are that it will deliver?
I'm really not convinced. I mean, it is comparing the sort of the ROC obligation and all these subsidies versus the more centralised planning of a feed-in tariff and the socialisation of the grid connection that's happening in Germany. And I have to say, from comparing the two markets, I think the German model is going to deliver more than the UK model.
Sorry, I don't know the energy market as well as people here, but the feed-in is a different argument from facilitating offshore, isn't it? I mean, feed-in is a sort of more kind of domestic.
It's domestic in this country. I mean, it could be. You're absolutely right.
For investors,
you could organise offshore wind that way.
We're investing Allianz's pension money, etc. And I think you've got more security on your returns, and by taking the grid, the engineering, and the commercial challenge of just building this offshore grid, it's enormous. And basically by socialising that in Germany and bringing it into, centralising it, that then makes the offshore developer, well, all I've got to do is put my wind farm there.
And you guaranteed the return.
Yeah.
So can I take you there at the back? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Peter Madigan. I'm from the BWEA.
Oh.
I wanted to inject a little bit of optimism into this discussion. I think it comes back to something Rob said in his opening statement. I think one of the advantages we have over other markets is that we're the sort of first mover in a lot of ways. We expect sort of this quarter to be delivering the first gigawatt of installed capacity offshore. And probably about this time next year, we'll be looking at the second gigawatt of offshore wind being installed at that timescale. I think we're talking about where the investment goes. It doesn't go where the market will be in 10 years' time. It goes where the market is now. And we have a huge advantage because we are doing it now and we have some big plans. And I think coming back to the points you're making about market choice, I think we have seen the market choose companies voting with their feet and investing in round 3 and investing in the offshore wind expansion. So I think the market is responding to that opportunity.
Brilliant. Let me take a few more questions from the floor. You and then if we come to you.
Hi, James Russell, Harland and Wolff. Yeah, we're multiplying.
So it's just cheating, he's really on the path.
I have a question for you. You can't. No, that's a joke. Okay. It was just really to see where we're going with this. I mean, the Crown Estate have a very good regulated structure there, and the round 3 exists, and they have tie-in from the developers. So I do think potential is there, and I think it will happen. And we're still debating that for some reason, I think. But how do we get green jobs?
We're debating it because there's so much scepticism in the room about whether it will happen.
Well, it will.
What's needed to facilitate it?
It will happen. The question is, does any of it touch UK shore?
Yeah, there's an economic benefit argument. Yeah,
economic benefit. So green jobs, that's the question. What can be done for green jobs from me?
Okay. Well, there's a question. Were you going to touch on that? You need a microphone, first of all. No, this gentleman here, if we could.
Hi, Jonathan Murray, PricewaterhouseCoopers. As a matter of fact, I was. So we've made a lot of comments about how it's not going to happen and nothing's happened. You know, who's going to invest and all this stuff. But round 3, the sites have been awarded and companies are keen to go ahead. And the real question that comes to my mind is, if you look at all of the construction work that's gone on already, as Nick Cled said, a lot of it has gone overseas. To what extent do we have the skills and the wherewithal to actually get green jobs in the UK, when if you look at, for example, ports of Bremerhaven in Germany, they've invested a huge amount of money, they've got all of the component facilities on site. These guys can, if they wanted to, build wind farms anywhere in the North Sea. How do we get some of that investment into the UK?
Con, come on.
Well, interesting you mentioned the Port of Bremerhaven, because Harland and Wolff have just finished the most complicated part of that project, which was the self-installing substation, where we provided assistance to a number of companies along with our own input, and actually the fabrication and assembly of that project.
Yeah, but effectively you're a subcontractor. He's saying the facility's there to supply the whole of the North Sea with wind turbines. You know, the beginnings of an infrastructure anyway.
The infancy of the industry is there in Germany.
That's a lot more than we've got, though.
We have, as Bruce and others have mentioned, we have areas in the UK where we have adopted either shipbuilding or oil and gas technology to start and fulfil the supply chain's requirements. What we need to do is to do more of that. Germany isn't at a more advanced stage than we are. We are as equally capable as what they are of moving it forward. What they have is a can-do attitude on it. We have that as well.
Okay. Got the can-do.
Sorry, I've got to follow up to that. I agree that there's a can-do attitude, and I remember reading about Harland & Wolff's interest in the industry a fair few months back. My comeback to that would be, if you look at the companies that have been involved in building the existing UK Round 1 and Round 2 wind farms, one of the main criteria that allowed them to win that work was their track record. How do you get over the fact that when it comes to building components for offshore wind farms, for example, foundations or even components for the turbine, a developer wants someone who can prove that they can deliver what they say they can deliver on time and on cost in a very harsh environment that is offshore?
I mean, we heard earlier there were some components that are being built already in Britain quite successfully, and world-leading companies. But Ed, you wanted to...
Sorry, I just wanted to come in, and I'm not sure if anyone else has said this already in the room, but I'd just like to say I really don't care about green jobs, and I really don't want green jobs. I want this to be delivered at the lowest cost possible in the most efficient way by the companies that are most suited to do it. And I think it's terribly dangerous in any sphere of activity to get hung up on the idea that we must have activity X or activity Y carried on in this country. Be nationalistic about this. You know, I mean, basically the simple calculation is for every green job you create, you destroy a job somewhere else in the economy. We should be worrying about Britain
really
as a whole, not about the green industry.
If you've got a resource and you allow other people to exploit the resource, so you exploiting the resource would necessarily mean other jobs destroyed, would it?
I don't understand what exploiting the resource means in this. So exploiting the resource, exploiting the wind, means delivering cheap, reliable green electricity to this country. Yeah. It doesn't mean a job creation scheme for people who might happen to work in that industry.
But if it could mean that, then that's an additional economic benefit.
If it does happen to mean that, that's an additional benefit, that's great. But don't imagine it's a net benefit to UK PLC as a whole.
Maria.
Yeah, but the only way we can drive down the cost and make it economically viable is to stimulate the establishment of a supply chain here in the UK. And that argument, unfortunately, Ed, you weren't here, but it's been very, very well rehearsed and expounded before you actually came. Yeah, but that's where we went. We've been talking a lot about investment, and that's what we need to invest in. We need inward investment to a very, very significant extent, and that to establish the confidence, another word also critically important, that will attract all the other players into the market and give them what they need to be able to take the risks.
I'm tempted to go back to our friend from Pricewaterhouse, but go Anne, if you could.
Yeah, it's just that the practical thing about this is we need to have the costs down, and what we need to do as a developer to bring the costs down is to qualify new vendors. And that's what we do in the oil and gas business. We'll do it in the wind business. And if there are vendors to be qualified in the UK, we'll happily do it.
So what you're saying is up to them to come to you with good, reliable products, and you're happy to...
With a good, reliable setup that they could enter into new products, and we could work in due time to qualify their product line and to qualify their production. And part of the Carbon Trust program is actually, as I will see it, a part of that game. And that's why we are into the Offshore Wind Accelerator program.
I can take a question from you and then you. So this gentleman first, if we could.
Hi, Gordon Edge. Gordon Edge from the British Wind Energy Association. We're here mob-handed.
Oh, this is cheating.
It's not. Okay. We know about this stuff.
Okay.
I just wanted to say we shouldn't be intimidated by Bremerhaven. It's trotted out a lot, and it's a good example. But let's be clear. They've invested a lot, and they can make 1,000 megawatts a year in that facility, and it's full. We're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7 gigawatts a year. The factories to make those turbines and those cables and those foundations have not yet been built. The opportunity is here in the UK. We've got the facilities potentially in a number of different spots around the UK to make it happen. We need to have the vision and the investment, and whether it's 400 million that Nick Clegg says that we need to put down, or whether it's a different number, I don't know. But we do need to be putting that money on the table and making these facilities happen here in the UK, because we're going to be spending a lot of money on offshore wind. And if we don't get the benefit here in the UK, a lot of people will be looking at us askance and going, why are we paying that money when we don't get the benefit? And it will happen here. It just, if we don't get the benefit, people will ask those questions. It'll be really difficult.
It comes back to the point Ed made, I think, yeah.
Yeah, well, also, people will be looking askance at us if it costs twice the price that it would have cost, because we're insisting on having it all done in Britain rather than Korea or Dubai or Germany, wherever it may be.
Sorry, not you, because you've already had you with the grey jumper. So yeah.
Hugh Saville from Staple.
No, sorry, but the guy in front, and then we'll come to you. Sorry.
Mark Wagner from Isentropic. We're developers of energy storage, so you'll see this takes the question in a slightly different direction. At the moment, wind piggybacks off the fact that the whole grid is very flexible. It's got lots and lots of gas on it. You can turn gas on, turn gas off, and you can balance out the grid very easily. When we've got 25 gigawatts of wind on the grid, we've got an incredibly difficult grid to manage, because it's going to be turning on and turning off all by itself. Additionally, we're going to have a lot of nuclear probably at the other end, which is completely inflexible but the other way. Wind at the moment doesn't pay anything, doesn't pay any penalty for the fact that it's very difficult to manage. In Japan.
That's rubbish. I'm sorry, it pays imbalance charges, and that is wrong. You cannot say that wind does not pay for what it imposes on the system.
It doesn't pay a full economic charge, shall we say. It's going to impose much greater stresses on the grid. If you talk to National Grid, they say we need 7 to 8 gigawatts of storage, which nobody has an incentive to build at the moment. In the old days, coming back to the points we made earlier about CGB and the national planning, we built a grid that could cope with that kind of stuff. Because we were building a lot of nuclear, we built loads of storage as well. Just be interested to know what the panel think about that.
He's got to have a right to reply. You want to... Sorry, I know, Maria, you probably... But
I am sorry. The idea that wind does not pay for the imbalance capacity that's on the system is just total nonsense. It's actually really small to begin with anyway. If we're going forward, that 7 or 8 gigawatts you talked about from National Grid, it's not storage. It was extra store, short-term operating reserve. We already have 4 of that already on the system. If we're going to get to, we're talking about 29, 30 gigawatts of wind, and you're talking about doubling that number, I don't think that's excessive. And then you're also talking about, if you interconnect more, if you bring in the demand side, you bring all of those down. It's not a big cost. We can do this. You're getting more than 10% of the wind in Ireland, in Spain, in Portugal, all being managed in very isolated systems. We can go much, much further than that.
Got to give him one reply, and then we can move on.
10% is not a problem. 20%, 30%, then you've got real problems.
Does anybody from the panel want to pick up on that? Well, that's kind of a little bit, yeah, I think we need to spread it a little wider around, sorry.
Well, who's
Rob,
going
you want to say something?
Well, I mean, clearly there is going to be a shift in the energy mix and how we manage it and all that, and that's very clear. But of course, the demand profile is changing as well. The transmission systems will have to change anyway, because we know that the generators are coming off that we have at the moment, and new ones are coming on. So in terms of that whole system design, it's moving as it is. But the need for storage, I think if there is one, the market will pick it up.
Will it, Ed?
Well, there will be, because the marginal cost which comes through from imbalancing charges will make charges unacceptable. So there is a system which will deal with it.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to tell a story, though, which is apparently Bill Gates was giving a talk to a group of Stanford business students. And at the end, one of them sticks his hand up and says, "And so, Mr. Gates, you seem to have done pretty well out of life. What advice would you give to anyone that can do the same as you?" He said, "If you can invent cheap, efficient, effective, scalable electricity storage, you'll be as rich as me." And that's, that is still the number one issue which we have not yet solved. We are waiting for the new Bill Gates to come along and do it.
Robin?
I think this is, again, leading us down a no-can-do path, which actually isn't terribly helpful. We've already taken National Grid's name in vain once from the floor. I'm going to take National Grid's name in vain again here. As the people who actually have to balance the system, they seem intensely comfortable with the idea of very large-scale wind power. They're not saying there's no problem. They're not saying there won't be changes to the way we potentially regulate and operate the system, but they're saying it can be done. So if we're going to think about this with, assuming that we're going to continue to have the same regulation of the market that we have today, that we're going to operate it in the same way that we have today, and that we're going to expect prices to behave the same way they have today, then of course it looks like a difficult task. But that's exactly the things that we have to change in order that we can move forward and have a better energy system for the future. So if the market's going to behave in a weird and perverse way because of the increased amount of wind power on, let's re-regulate the market so that it actually gives a return to people who do provide low carbon energy, who do provide energy security, and who do balance the system. This isn't just about wind power. Of course, the system has to balance everything else as well. When a nuclear power station falls over, there's an awful lot of backup that needs to come into play. That costs money as well. Going forward, we're looking at smart grids, we're looking at local generation as well. All of those things need a more sophisticated approach to grid balancing. It's not like there is a no-cost option. Whatever we do, it's going to cost us money, and this is about making the right choice that's also going to benefit the UK and make us more competitive while providing the energy needs. And that's where we've got to have this can-do attitude. Okay. That's where we've got to look at these problems and find solutions and not just hold them up as reasons to do nothing.
We're running out of time, so I want to take a few more points and questions from the floor. There's a gentleman, the guy who originally...
Hugh Saville from Stapleton International. To go back to Nick Clegg's point about maximising British content in these projects, one of the things that's not been discussed today is the cost of actually installing these turbines, shipping them out to the fields and installing them. To do that, you require very, very specialist shipping, heavy lift ships and dynamic positioning and everything else. There are at least two British ship owners that I'm aware of that's investing very heavily in these special vessels to do that. One owner I know is having his ships built in China, and the other one in Dubai.
Yeah,
and I think this illustrates once again the problem that our friends at Harland and Wolff are going to have, competing with Chinese shipyards to build these very specialist vessels, which are very expensive to build when it can't be done economically in the UK.
Okay. Do you want to very quickly come back on that? It is a challenge, isn't it? Dubai, China.
I think the challenge that the UK and European shipbuilding has already faced for the past 30 years from Korea, then China and Dubai is not going to change. Ships are internationally mobile assets. They move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. They're built in the lowest cost, most tax favourable jurisdictions. So I don't see that we will necessarily ever compete in that.
Okay, this gentleman there with the paper up.
Malcolm Garrity from Synergy. Sorry, we're going on about finance. We've been going on about finance all night. One of the things I would point towards is this working?
Yeah, it is working, yeah.
Is I'd like the views of the panel on whether they think that the planning process is going to be in a position to deliver.
Okay, we'll do very quickly. Who wants to pick that one up?
Can I
yeah, you can have a go, yeah.
Okay. We welcome the IPC because it stood for all the things we've been asking for years. Transparency, speed, fairness and consistency. Tories are saying they're going to throw it out. Offshore, we're not seeing that so much as a problem immediately because I think I'm safe in saying, Rob, we haven't had an offshore wind project declined in an application for... Well, we haven't...
Well, we have one. It's probably Malcolm's, actually.
Right. So sorry about
just
that.
Just one.
Okay. But there is a very high expectation that the problem for consenting is not going to be offshore. Okay. The difficulty is going to be in the new grid infrastructure we need with a 50% bigger capacity already signed up to. We know that that's actually going to happen. It's the bringing it ashore. It's when we actually get on land that's still a problem. And that is in anybody's guess after a new government is installed in May.
Okay, Maria, anybody else want to quickly respond to that? No? Too late?
Just to reinforce it, I think the IPC is all important, or a centralised planning system, but we do have a lot more learning about what's going on offshore now.
No. And just to clarify on the Conservatives as well, I don't think the Conservatives will completely.
Okay.
I think we're going to stick with...
You want to come back? Your 3 turbines turned down.
3 turbines, 90 turbines.
Oh, listen.
Get it right. No, I think this industry could motor ahead with, in one easy lesson. We've heard guys talking about certainty of work, continuity, blah-de-blah. If we could get a planning system that says, right, fine, preference to offshore wind or wind power, it's going to be delivered, that would give you your continuity, it would give you your certainty, it would allow people to put vessels in place. Yeah. It would allow people to put the Hutchison Whampoa to put huge areas of land by their port to be able to develop it. But if we don't get the planning process right, and I'm not sure that the IPC is going to be delivering for us, it's not in place properly yet, it hasn't been proven, I have concerns. Okay. But that's one thing that we could do, that the government could do, it wouldn't cost it much, and we'd get motoring ahead.
Okay, one last question. Yeah, as long as you don't represent a company already represented on the panel.
Matthew Delaney from Vestas Wind Systems. I just have a comment. We've had a lot of discussion about will the jobs come, will the benefits come, and I just want to make a point that actually the industry is creating green jobs now, and we are getting some benefits. We're investing heavily on the Isle of Wight, expanding with a new R&D technology centre, creating a lot of new jobs, investing millions, and that is to reduce the cost of energy to develop offshore technology, next generation technology. So I just think we should recognise jobs are being created now, and there are many more to come in the future.
I'm tempted to make Vestas. But anyway, we won't go there. It's too late. We've overrun massively by 45 minutes, which clearly I hope reflects the fact that it's been an interesting discussion. It's certainly been very interesting for me. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone on the panel for taking part. And, I think it's been a very useful discussion. I look forward to making a report for Newsnight on the opportunities for offshore. So thank you very much, everybody.